Right, so we see that we're not having enough time to even cover the minimal amount of topics that we hoped to have accomplished today. But this will just teach us that really we need a lot more time to do this properly, and that today is just a taste, an introduction to this topic. So of all of the alternative possibilities of concluding, since the phrase TQM was mentioned before, we'll turn to the page that has on it at the top the 13 principles of quality management. Which is mostly paraphrased from Demming's 14 principles of management, of quality management. But there he has 14. Some of them are redundant, especially 2 of them are totally redundant. So therefore we have incorporated the 2 redundant ones as one that we'll mention in a moment. Even besides these 2 totally redundant ones, there's a lot of overlapping in his presentation. It's not a mathematically sound axiomatic system, that there's no overlap. Nonetheless, we have in front of us paraphrased the basic principles of management that he taught the Japanese and was proved itself so successful, and then brought back to America. Now, the reason that we're allowing ourselves even to take something from a secular source and to give it a Kabbalistic model, that sounds in itself very innovative. How can we rely upon a secular source and treat it as though it has relevance and significance from a Jewish perspective, especially the perspective of the inner soul of the Torah, which is the Kabbalah? So the way to understand that is based upon two basic principles that we've already mentioned today. One is Ki mimenu nikach la'avodat Hashem chokhmah ba'goyim ta'amin, just like Jethro taught Moshe Rabbeinu his principles, and Moshe Rabbeinu listened to him attentively and incorporated his thoughts and his ideas of proper management into the Jewish people, into the very organization, the roots of the Jewish people. So we clearly see that it's not disqualified or forbidden in any sense or manner whatsoever to learn from secular sources. Just the very opposite. If we ourselves are intelligent enough and insightful enough to be able to elevate the sparks of secular wisdom, this produces great light above, much more so even than light which descends initially from above. But Yitro himself means advantage. Before we spoke of the fact that Yitro is a reincarnation of Kayin, that Kayin means both kinyan, which is purchase, as well as kina, which is jealousy. We talked about a little bit. But we didn't explain what is the meaning of the name Yitro. Yitro means advantage, addition. About Yitro, the Zohar HaKodesh says, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai in the Zohar teaches us that Yitro is Yitron Ha'or Min HaChoshech, the advantage of light that comes out of darkness. Is if you can extract, which is actually to redeem, sparks of light that are presently in a state of darkness. Darkness means a secular frame, a secular consciousness. And you can elevate that into give it its proper Torah model, and thereby relate it to a infinitude of Torah values. You are thereby taking light out of darkness. And that light that comes out of darkness is infinitely stronger and brilliant, even the light that initially derives from a Torah text. This is called Ki Yitron Ha'or Min HaChoshech. But obviously, in order to be able to do that, you have to be insightful enough, wise enough to know how to properly convert the secular wisdom into to give it its holy, sacred form, the proper model, because it's not obvious. So for that, we need the second principle that we mentioned before. The wisdom was the chush, the inner sense of Kabbalah. What did we explain? That Kabbalah comes from the phrase makbilot halulaot, the one and only phrase in the Torah which uses this root Kabbalah not in the sense of receiving, but in the sense of two sets being parallel to one another, and having the insight to know how to make them correspond one to one, to draw the lines properly. So if, for instance, Demming has 14 or 13 principles to him, he obviously does not order them in the proper way according to Kabbalah. So that insight, to be able to look deep into his principles and to actually see down, deep down, to dive deep down into his principles to a level that he himself obviously was not conscious of whatsoever. As we said, even in relation to Yitro, the Yitro was a Ger Tzedek, he was a convert. Nonetheless, he himself did not comprehend the depth of his own advice. Kol sheken v'kal v'chomer, how much the more so somebody like Demming, that we certainly can't expect him to know the spiritual roots of what he himself is saying. We just know that since this actually works, it works well, it works very, very well, it must have spiritual roots to it. Right, so once more, the first principle that is necessary in order to enter into such a meditation is the knowledge or the awareness of Yitron Ha'or Min HaChoshech. The advantage of light that comes when it comes out of darkness, which means something holy that comes out of a context which was previously secular. Then, but to do it properly, it's only if there is a true deep chush of parallelism, which is the true chush of Kabbalah, which is not obvious at all. So here we are now presenting a very classic and beautiful example of this. Now, not all of the English here are, I'm repeating it once more, are the direct statements of Demming, but it's a very close paraphrasing, and it's, if it is paraphrased, it's for the sake of making it much clearer the relationship between the particular principle and the spiritual power behind it, its spiritual root that we're trying here to describe. All right, so let's now start from the top. Take it from the top. This has three different heads. This is the terminology of the Kabbalah. The highest head is called the unknowable head, which in the soul corresponds to faith, simple faith. The second head of the superconscious is called the head of nothingness, Reisha Da'ayin, which corresponds in the soul to serenity or pleasure, or super rational pleasure. The third head is called Reisha Da'arich, the infinite head, or the head of expansiveness, of spreading, expansion, which in the soul corresponds to the super rational will, power of will. Right, so first we'll emphasize these three heads. How are they reflected as principles of management according to this system of quality management? And once more, before we begin, I want to repeat again what was taught before, that as we said, there's not necessarily total redundancy, but it's certainly the case that all of this thought can be reduced into a much smaller number of principles. That the final reduction is what we learned before. The reduction into the three principles which are called knowing how to interact, knowing how to become involved and not over-involved. Involvement, let's call it involvement without interference. the quality, the chush, the sense to be involved all over, but not to interfere. That is basic principle number one. Basic principle number two is one's motivation and one's consciousness directed towards quality, whether it's the quality of the product or the quality of the relationship, or all different, there are different levels of quality, echut. And the third is creating a continual flow of energy. And to understand this was also mentioned but not explained, this would have to be explained at length, the true interrelationship and interdependency of cash flow and learning flow, which is one of the greatest innovations of modern systems, modern management and business. That there are two basic manifestations of flow. One is cash flow and the other is information flow and learning flow. And actually there is a direct interdependency of these two flows one to the other. So once more, these concepts of mu'uravut and echut and zrima that were mentioned before, kedem mifalav mi'az, are the three basic sub-principles behind everything that's being described here. So now once more, let's take it from the top. The top is emunah. Emunah is faith. The paraphrase of one of the principles is develop long-term relationships of loyalty and trust with suppliers, workers, and customers. The three arenas of involvement with your own employees, with your own suppliers, and with your own customers. Suppliers here either means suppliers of merchandise that you need, or also funders, suppliers of money, of funds, of funding. One has to develop, not if a person is concerned, or also an all-inclusive concept of modern management is that you can do it superficially or you can do it non-superficially. To do things superficially means that I simply check, I'm always checking the expenses versus the income. It's all accounting, it's all money. How much did I spend? How much did I earn? That's called looking at the reality of the business on its most superficial level. And that is always entering into a mind space of short-term relationships. Because I'm always concerned how much I'm going to spend today, how much am I going to make today. As for superficiality shortens the term of the time span of consciousness in one's transactions. Whereas the deeper one roots himself in what he's doing in his business, or whatever he happens to be doing, the breadth of the span of time that he's dealing with becomes more and more. This is a great principle, meaning that there are always two dimensions to reality. There's an outer revealed dimension, which once more is how much did I make today? How much did I spend? How much did I earn? And there's a much, much deeper relationship to reality, which is the inner dimension of reality, which is what relationships under the scene are being developed, which will be valuable and profitable in the long term, and not necessarily in the short term. Right? So the first principle is that a person has to develop long-term relationships based, and once more, the longer the term the relationship is, meaning that I don't see the result immediately on the spot, that itself demands more and more faith. The ultimate long term is to believe in God in such a way that no matter what happens in the short term, like just before someone came up to me and started talking about the Holocaust. He came up and he said, it's all very nice to talk about Kabbalah, but what do you have to say about the Holocaust? All right, so there's very little to say. So a person is just looking at what's happening at the short term, just like Professor Kala said before. The short term can also be 4,000 years. If you're looking at things on their superficial plane, which is what is happening as my physical limited consciousness and I sees things, then you're always going to sense disloyalty. What does the Holocaust, for instance, arouse in Jewish consciousness? How can God do such a thing? God appears to be unloyal to his people, to his children. Where is the trust? Where is the faith? Once more, whenever there's a problem with faith, it means that the span, the domain of the vision is limited. If one could see things in its full long time, and as we were talking before about a global village, so the basic idea of a global village was taken to mean just spatially. He didn't talk about modern physics, that the time-space is one reality. And therefore, if you talk about the real global village, you're not just talking about the global village in space, in the present, but you're talking about a global village over all of history. The time also becomes condensed and becomes connected. All time, and not just these 6,000 years of this world, but even what was before and what is after. And this is always the answer to a question like the Holocaust, as the Rabbi always said, that you can never understand it if you can't get out of the time, the 6,000 years of this world. Unless you'll get into some other time experience altogether, some long-term loyalty of God and the Jewish people, it's impossible to comprehend and to justify, to rationalize something like the Holocaust. So this is an example, or maybe the deepest, most painful example of what is the difference between short-term relationships that you always have problems with loyalty versus long-term relationships where are based on total loyalty and emunah, which emunah is something which is unknowable in the present state of consciousness. It's something which is beyond, totally beyond the superficial vision of reality that I have in the present. As I took a concept here, which according to the Japanese is maybe a 50-year plan, and instead of a 50-year plan, I talked about a billion-year plan, or much more than a billion-year plan, an infinite-year plan. That the infinite-year plan is the divine plan. And absolutely all of that infinite-year plan is actually all condensed into one time village. For the Jew, for the Jewish soul that at its very highest level has faith in God, and God has faith and is faithful and loyal to us. So that was just an expansion upon this first principle here. The second principle. The second principle reads, build quality into the product and thereby eliminate need for inspection. One of the basic problems of management is that if quality was not emphasized from the outset, then a certain percentage of your goods, of your products have defects to them, and you don't want to sell a defective product to your consumer, because according to many statistical studies, a non-satisfied consumer tells it to 20 different people, whereas a satisfied consumer tells only to 8 people. This is the statistical evidence. So you obviously don't want not only to sell a defective product to one person, one consumer, but it's going to get out to another 20 people, and you're going to be in big trouble. So what do you do about defections? You check, you inspect. So Demming said that inspection is one of the worst wastes of time and energy in a company. And the only way to eliminate that is through building quality into the essence of the production. Now, pure quality, let's turn the page. There are two, let's also here. The next page here are phrases in Hebrew from the Torah which correspond to all of these levels. These are called asmachtot from the Torah, with origins, sources from the Torah which correspond one-to-one to all of these levels and suggest the relationship between this particular principle of management and this level of the soul. So for instance, the very first thing, which is doing business in good faith, and good faith means long-term relationships of loyalty to suppliers, to employees, and to consumers. That is the simple, basic phrase in the Torah which is called Masal Matan Be'emunah, doing business with faith. This is such a basic principle, which is also called Derech Eretz Kadma Torah, that a person has to know and incorporate in his life Derech Eretz, which is just being a good, honest business person even before he can approach the learning of Torah. This is such a basic principle that our sages say that the very first thing that the soul is asked after it leaves this world, after 120 years, and goes up to heaven, is Nasata v'natata be'emunah. Did you do business in good faith? There's nothing higher, even before asking about Torah or anything, did you do business in good faith? So that's the asmachta from the Torah to the highest level. This phrase, Masal Matan Be'emunah. Now, the second one that we're talking about, which is building, making quality the product. This quality, the consciousness of quality is built into the product. What is another word for quality in the Torah? Maybe the simplest word for quality is the word tov, goodness. Hashem created light. He looked at the light. It's a little bit different from Demming. It means he made an inspection. First he created the light, and then he inspected the light to see how it came out, how it turned out, and he saw that it turned out good. It was quality. He created quality light. Vayar Elokim et or ki tov. Once more, the most important word for quality is tov, is good. Now, there's a famous expression, one of the basic expressions of Sefer Yetzirah, the first classic work of Kabbalah, that reads, as I said here on the second page, En betov lemala mi'oneg. There is no good higher than serenity or pleasure. Meaning that the inherent goodness of any partsuf, of any full stature of 10 sfirot, is its dimension of pleasure. En betov lemala mi'oneg. Once more, it doesn't mean physical pleasure. It means the highest spiritual level of serenity. That itself is the ultimate goodness of a stature, means of a product. And so also in a management, in a corporation, making the quality, the essence of the product relates to the level of pleasure. This is the pleasure of the company. Before, when we heard about just the basic structure of the company, which is one of our pages here, so there we were taught that the president, the CEO, corresponds to the pleasure. So in addition to the way it was explained before, that the president takes pleasure, is the one that takes pleasure in the goodly workings, the total workings of the company. A deeper level is that the president, for the company, symbolizes the quality he himself. This is like the absolute Demming ideal, that the president is for everybody else the symbol of quality, which is the symbol of pleasure. The president of the company is the one that radiates pleasure, that everybody is doing his task, is performing his work, his function in the company with maximal enjoyment. It's all a good time. We're all having a good time. Where does that, we said that the whole idea of flat hierarchy is that the top levels are basically radiating hashra'ah, not making all of the decisions. So that hashra'ah, that inspiration of goodness and quality, once more, goodness and quality are the same thing. En betov l'mala mi'onek. And tov is eichut, vayara elokim et or ki tov. Hashem made it, and he saw that it was good. The person that is intended to radiate that sense of quality and enjoyment is the president. That's the president head of the company. The one that gives the trust are really the board that trust and invest. One other very, very important etymological point that we didn't make yet is that the word emunah in Hebrew, faith, is related to the word mammon, money. We know that even money, when you say the word money and when we're speaking English together and we say the word money, so you should also know that this is one of the words in English which comes from Hebrew. There are many words in English, much more than people imagine. There are hundreds and thousands of words that we say every day in English that are really Hebrew derivatives. One of them is money. That money comes from mammon, and mammon comes from emunah. So we see that money has a very, very high source. It's the top of the pinnacle. The president doesn't represent the money, he represents the pleasure of the quality. In Hebrew there's a word kef, that everybody is at a maximal level of enjoyment. Once more, that's called the Reisha Da'ayin, the second head of the crown. The crown has 3 heads to it. All right, now let's go back to the third one. The third one is to constantly improve. There's one concept, once more, when you first read these principles, as we said at the very beginning, they seem to be very, very overlapping. But there's another advantage of light coming from darkness. If we really click properly into the parallelism, the proper parallelism, then they do receive individual meanings. That's true individual specific meanings. For instance, here he said just before, build quality into the essence of the product. As he said, in order to avoid and eliminate the necessity for inspection. But nonetheless, the positive statement was build quality. Then he says another thing, be conscious of continual progress. So that sounds pretty close, because progress means that you're making the product better. What is the difference, the slight difference, which here, according to Kabbalah, we can understand what is the difference between the essence of quality and the drive for continual progress, making it better, or as was said before, the statement that the only thing which doesn't change, the only thing which is constant is change. Change for the better. That concept of always changing for the better is not just enough the essence of quality, but always making it better and better. That is already will. That's willpower. As we said before in Kabbalah, will is called the Reisha Da'arich, the ever-expanding head. It's always expanding its frontiers. It's a consciousness. The essence of pleasure does not experience frontiers which always have to be broken and spread. Pleasure itself is not confined in any borders whatsoever. Will is already a sense of border. The borders always have to be enlarged. Like it says of Eretz Yisrael, that Eretz Yisrael eventually will spread out, expand over the whole earth. Atida Eretz Yisrael shetitpashet b'chol ha'aratzot. So once more, that sense of ever expanding, but not just ever expanding once more superficially, that as we said before, superficially means that you're only concerned with how much money did I make today. Not that type of ever expanding. Ever expanding one's frontiers of improvement, improving the product, improving relationships, improving everything, making it all work better. That the ultimate experience of the goodness, which is the quality, is the pleasure itself. But making that expand, that's the next level of the head, which is the will. Improve constantly the system of production and service. Now, the phrase on the next page, which corresponds to that, is called Ratzon Lehitiv, the will to make things ever better. That's a basic phrase in Kabbalah, which is also called Yelchu Mechayel El Chayel. Before we're talking about Anshe Chayel. Anshe Chayel, a part of Anshe Chayel, Ish Chayel, a man of valor, as we also mentioned before, he has ambition and drive and initiative. He's always going from Chayel to Chayel, from success to success. He never stops. It says that tzaddikim have no rest. En lehem menucha, not in this world, not even in the world to come. Shne'emar yelchu mechayel lachayel, they're always going ahead in this world and the world to come. What level of the tzaddik does that refer to? It refers to his will. He started, his will was so affirmative, was so strong in this lifetime that it reached a critical, what's called in physics, a critical mass, that it just keeps on going forever and ever, in this lifetime and in the world to come. Tzadikim en lehem menucha, shne'emar yelchu mechayel lachayel. So once more, that has to do with will. That's called the power of will of the tzaddik. And the way that it's reflected in a company situation is the awareness of the need to ever improve. Not just expand, improve. But it's called the Reisha Da'arich, the ever-expanding head. In Kabbalah, when you have the very term Ein Sof, the infinite, it's actually referring to this, the third head, the lowest head of the superconscious. All right, now number 4. Number 4 is what we were talking about before, the learning flow. Institute a vigorous program of education and self-improvement. That everybody, not only does the product have to become better and better, but everybody has to be learning more and more. Obviously, this is very clear that this one corresponds to wisdom. And wisdom which is also never ending and never ceasing. In the terminology of Chassidut, it is called Nevi'at HaEn Sof, that from the En Sof, which is the will, drops of wisdom are ever flowing and ever manifesting themselves in the consciousness. Every split second, as it were, there's a new flash of insight. That is the deep thing, the deep dimension that corresponds here to one of our sfirot. Or that this concept of always learning more and more, actually here is the one that I mentioned before, that in Demming's system of 14 points, there is apparently total redundancy, because he has one that reads like this, and he has another one which is almost the same, which he calls on-the-job training. So those were the two that here were incorporated into one.
Maybe he felt it was especially important.
Into a special.
He repeated it because it was important.
It's all important. Okay. There's a famous phrase which reads, Yagati umatzati ta'amin. That if a person toils hard to learn, Whereas here it means that we demand of every worker, every employee, that he makes an effort, a conscious effort to learn and to advance. That's called yagati umatzati, that if a person makes an effort and is always making an effort, he will find. What does the word find mean? Find new insights. Find things which are unexpected. A true insight is a mitziah, something which is unexpected. If a person is always trying to advance in learning, he will be given from his superconscious, from Hashem through his superconscious, he will be given new insights. Of this it says, Oraita mi chokhmah nafka, that's the other phrase that's written here, that the Torah comes out, is revealed from wisdom. So the learning principle is obviously related to ever new insights of Torah, which are the Sphira of wisdom. The next one. The next one is Binah, the mother, understanding, which as a spiritual experience corresponds to the satisfaction of accomplishment. It says, Eim habanim smecha, the mother, as we had also before in the model of the company, is the development. The father is the research, and the mother is the developing of the research. Why is the mother developing? Because the mother takes the seed of the father and develops it for 9 months. When the child is born after the development in the womb of the mother of 9 months, which is called the womb of understanding of Binah, then the experience of having well developed the seed of insight is simcha, happiness. Of this it says, we read in Tehillim, Eim habanim smecha. The mother is joyful, is happy, because she has succeeded, accomplished the task of taking a seed and developing it into a full human being. Now in Kabbalah we're taught that she is not only happy when she gives birth, after she gives birth, but the very spiritual power which positively helps her develop the fetus, her pregnancy, is joy. Is joy in anticipation of the future. It says that mother is future-oriented. From the very first moment that she becomes pregnant, she's living with the birth. And she's already happy about the birth. And that happiness about the birth in the future is the most positive force that helps her develop the seed and the fetus. So what does that mean spiritually? It means that a person has a sense of happiness, which is true satisfaction due to accomplishment, usually not accomplishing something which I myself have invented, but being able to take an invention and well develop it, bring it to its culmination, to its consummation. Just like development department versus research department. So how does this read as one of the principles of quality management? Give workers the right to pride of workmanship. He makes a very, very important point that workmanship here means quality and not quantity. He's always emphasizing the quality aspect and not the quantity aspect. But the pride does not come from how much you did, but from how well you did it. Which, as was said before, it's almost going back to the pre-industrial revolution. That the emphasis was on the specific goodness, the quality of the individual product, and the pride of the craftsman, of the worker in the beautiful, if he was a carpenter, in the beautiful table and chairs that he, with his own hands, made, without machines. So that same sense of pride in workmanship, this is called the mother principle of happiness and joy and satisfaction in being able to take something and develop it properly. And that's most essential to give to one's employers. All right, number 6 now, which corresponds to that. Once more we had to look at the verse. The verse for that was the verse that I just quoted, Eim habanim smecha, the mother of children, which means the mother the accomplishment, the hasaga, is a very important also etymological phenomenon in Hebrew, that the word to conceive in one's mind, in one's intellect, lahasig, is the same word to accomplish any task whatsoever. Also, it's very interesting that in English, the word conception, to conceive an idea, is the same as conception of pregnancy, to conceive a child. It's also a very, very important relationship. In Hebrew, to conceive, lahasig, is the same as to accomplish any function. Because to achieve means to reach an end, lahasig yad, to reach a goal, to accomplish a goal. Once more, that's a mother principle. And the verse for that is Eim Habanim Smecha. Now the next one, that reads here in English, put everyone in the company to work to accomplish the transformation to quality management. But the whole company has to change. In order to make it change properly, like the idea that was also mentioned before, to re-engineer the whole company, this is a task for everybody. No one, even the president, no one person can achieve this task by himself. If you don't make everybody in the whole company, we have a big company, we have 100 people working for us. We want to make a metamorphosis. This also has to do with the Yitro principle, because Yitro himself, Jethro, was not able to teach his philosophy and his understanding of organization before he himself went through a metamorphosis. That his metamorphosis was his conversion. How did he go through that metamorphosis? Where do we know, where do we find in the Torah, this we didn't mention before, that actually he converted before he told Moshe Rabbeinu his advice? It says, Vayichad Yitro al kol hatov, when he experienced all the goodness and all those miracles and wonders that God did to Israel, it says Vayichad. What does Vayichad mean? It has the simple meaning of Vayichad means that he was joyful. He became tremendously happy, milashon chedva. Another meaning that Chazal say, that Rashi says Vayichad Yitro, is that his body became full of goose pimples, because all of those Egyptians that were drowned in the water. Because he had a sense, since he was coming from the world in general, he still had an affinity to everyone, to humanity at large. So even though he was astonished and so impressed by the miracles that God did, that he was now converting and going through a metamorphosis, nonetheless, he was goose-pimpled, Vayichad nasab saro chiludin, that's the expression of Chazal, because of the loss of all of those lives, all of those Egyptians that drowned. But Chazal say there's a third interpretation. Rashi doesn't quote this in his commentary in the Torah. Chazal say in the Gemara, in the Talmud, that word Vayichad, which al pipshat means joyful, is he'avir al bsaro cherev chada. Vayichad means sharp. Sharp means goose pimples also. But the sharpness, he took a sharp knife and circumcised himself. That's what Chazal say the meaning of this is in the Gemara. That by the he'avir al bsaro cherev chada means that in his joy himself, in his very joy, the joy expressed itself by taking a sharp knife and cutting himself and circumcising himself. And at that moment he underwent, and he on his own flesh, he underwent a total metamorphosis, and then he was able to teach Moshe also how to metamorphosize the whole structure of the Jewish people, because that's actually what he was teaching him. But the whole teaching is how to undergo a metamorphosis, a change. So what does this principle say? It says if you don't put everybody in the previous company, the previous form of the company, into the realization and the objective that we're going to now metamorphosize, create a total transition, it won't happen. It won't work. Everybody must be involved. Now that principle is everybody being involved. What is the verse that we bring to that? Yachad Shiftei Yisrael. Yachad means together. Yachad is Yichud, which means union. Yachad is also the same root, the same basic two-letter root of Cherev Chada. Vayichad Yitro. Yichud. Yachad Shiftei Yisrael. If all of the tribes do not participate and join together in the objective of a total transformation, which is a total metamorphosis, it's not going to happen. That's called a Da'at principle. Da'at principle means that we have to do it together. Let's.
Doesn't this also imply, to some extent, that sometimes the total metamorphosis can be brought about if we get rid of the old culture and bring in a new culture?
That's what we're saying. But in order, everybody has to be aware of this objective. Let's say nowadays, give another secular example, which can also be used for holiness. Nowadays, we hear a lot about what's called New Age, that the world is entering into New Age. So obviously, a Jew always is every day waiting for the New Age, because the New Age is Mashiach, is the Messianic age, which is also we're talking about before, the ultimate result of our global village, of all becoming one. But that New Age, why isn't it yet happening, the New Age? Everybody's talking about it as though it's about to happen. It's clear that not enough people are into it. It's just a question of let's all get into it. That's also what the Rabbi was trying to say. Let's all get into this objective that we're now entering a new age. And if we'll all get into it and all be directed towards the new age, then it will really happen. So that state, or that awareness, is Da'at. The Da'at demands doing it together. Right, the next one. Chesed. Chesed is kindness. What is the principle of kindness here? Direct your goal to become competitive, to stay in business, and to provide jobs. What does he mean? He means don't think about making money. That's not the objective. Think about becoming a good competitive business, and even more than that, think about becoming a welfare state. If we're talking about a business being the government of a people, then your goal is that everybody is doing well, that you are providing maximal jobs to everyone, and maximal salaries to everyone. There's prosperity in the country. Don't think about your own pocket. Think about maximal welfare, which is the maximal ability to provide jobs. Is also one of the basic principles throughout the whole Torah. That the whole Torah is directed, everything that has to do with asakim, with business dealings, is to give Jews work. As many Jews, the proper work that they need. This is one of the biggest mitzvot in the Torah. This is a much greater mitzvah of gemilut chesed, much greater kindness, to provide somebody with a job than to give him charity. It's infinitely more. If you give a person a job, that's called rehabilitation. That's infinitely greater than giving him money, than giving him a charity. Once more, there's no more chesed. This we're taught. The Ram makes a big point of this. There's no greater chesed than being able to provide someone with a job. So if the principle here says that the goal is to make it work, to make your company competitive and to stay in business in order to provide the maximum amount of people with jobs, that is a pure chesed orientation. What is the verse that we brought for that? The verse is Olam Chesed Yibaneh, that the world is built, is constructed through means of chesed. And here the world means the company, or the government, the people. In order to build and construct a government, it has to be based on chesed, meaning that the goal is chesed. That what you're really trying to do is you're trying to make as many job opportunities for as many people as possible. Which means that you're a welfare state. Olam chesed yibaneh. Now Gvura, the next one. Vura is yir'ah. Yir'ah, fear, awe, is like we were talking about in the previous talk about the four principles, the four qualifications of leadership that Yitro mentioned. The second one was Yir'ei Elokim, God-fearers. We said that that has to do with being conscientious, being afraid of making mistakes. Not only is it afraid of making mistakes, but we also heard something afterwards, after that talk, from the last talk that we heard, is that part of the basis of Yitro's system, which is what we call the flat hierarchy, or the democratic monarchy, or however you like to call it, is that responsibility is shared. That there's a maximal sharing of responsibility. Responsibility is also conscientiousness. It's being responsible. Not saying, well, no, I didn't give the order. The order came from above, so I'm just following the order blindly and not thinking about whether it's a good order or a bad order, not objecting to what my gut feeling says is a bad order. I'm just doing it, and I'm not to blame. He's to blame, the person above me. That's called being irresponsible. The true fear is every person become responsible. Obviously, the higher you are in the pyramid, the more responsible you have to feel yourself. The more bitul hayesh, we said that Yir'ei Elokim is bitul hayesh, the second level of bitul, under the bitul, the nullification of Anshe Chaya. So that's here this principle. Another important thing that we didn't mention, we have to explain at more length, is the fear of wasting time. The fear of having to, just like there's a fear of having to inspect your product because you didn't do it right in the first place, there's another fear of having to say something over again because you didn't say it right in the first place. You didn't explain yourself enough in the first place, so you're going to create a tremendous exponential amount of confusion because you didn't say it right initially. Where do we learn that principle from? We learn it from the very first sin of the world, which is that of Adam and Eve. What is the sin? The Or HaChaim HaKodesh says that the sin began from Adam not explaining to Eve properly what God told him. And because he didn't make it clear to her, his communication was not clear. He even goes deeper to say that the reason that his communication was not clear is because he didn't love her enough. He says that if he would have loved her enough, if there would have been true ahava, then one of the ways that true love reflects itself is that you say as much as is necessary. You don't say too little, you don't say too much, but you say everything that is necessary to understand exactly what you mean. What didn't he say? He didn't explain to her that just you're forbidden to eat from the fruit of the tree, but you're allowed to touch it. She went on to add and to think that maybe you're forbidden to touch it. Then the snake pushed her and made her touch it, and she saw that she didn't die, so he went on to seduce her into eating from it. Once more, the Or HaChaim, if you look there, one of the greatest commentaries, explains that the problem, the root of the sin, was the lack of the initial proper communication. He didn't tell her exactly what God had told him. So once more, a person that is aware of that if I don't say it right, it can have dramatic negative results, disastrous results, if I don't say it right the first time. And it can definitely, even if it doesn't have disastrous results, it definitely can waste a tremendous amount of time and energy. That's part of Yir'ei Elokim, of the second qualification, which here is Yirah. So once more, how does he say it? First he says, be responsible. Don't push off the blame to somebody else. Don't accept mistakes and faulty methodology. Once more, this is called Yirat Chet. Yirat Chet, as we explained before, is being afraid of making a mistake. Because you're very, very conscientious. That's called Yirah. What is the phrase? We brought another phrase here. With this phrase actually teaches us something new, a new thought. The phrase that we brought for this from the Torah is Hocheach tocheach et amitecha. When he says in his principle, don't accept mistakes, he means that the boss or the manager should not accept mistakes from the workers. When he said be responsible, he meant that the manager be responsible. So what is the phrase that we brought for that? We brought hochiach tochiach et amitecha. There is a commandment, if somebody is doing something wrong, to rebuke him, to tell him that you did it wrong. It's talking about doing an avera instead of a mitzvah. But how does the Torah read? It reads, rebuke, you shall rebuke your friend. Why does it say over? Hochiach tochiach. The Baal Shem Tov says that you shall never rebuke somebody else if you don't rebuke yourself first. What does it mean to rebuke yourself first? To realize in a certain sense that I'm responsible. Because after, in a deep sense, taking responsibility yourself, then you can go and criticize with constructive criticism that you did it wrong. But your criticism will never be constructive that you did it wrong if I don't take responsibility, especially if I'm in charge. If I'm in charge of you and you did something wrong, then if I don't take responsibility, I can never properly, constructively criticize you for doing something wrong. But if I do take responsibility, then I can constructively criticize your mistake. That's called Ocheach Tochiach Damitecha. The next one is institute leadership. This is Tiferet. Tiferet is Rachamim, mercy. Help people and machines to do a better job. Don't, once more, this is a continuation of the previous thought. Don't blame people for mistakes. If your employees are making your mistakes, blame yourself and know that the solution to the problem is better leadership. And that the objective of leadership is not to be a shoter, not to be a policeman. That's not a leader. A leader is a helper, is somebody that helps the person on the job do a better job and makes sure that the person has the proper equipment to do the best job and that the equipment works the best. You have to help the employee and you have to help the equipment do a better job. So what is that? Where is that coming from as a property of the soul? That's coming from a sense of mercy. What is the relationship between mercy and leadership? So now we'll look at the verse. The verse reads, this is from the prophet Isaiah. It reads, Ki merachamam yenahagem. To be a leader, you have to have mercy. The basic principle of leadership is having mercy on the people that you're leading. All the leaders of Israel were first shepherds. They had to first prove themselves that they were merciful shepherds over flocks of sheep, and then they were appointed to become leaders of the people. And what does it mean, leadership? It means that you're always helping the people do a better job. And you're not blaming them, you're not a policeman, you're not blaming them for faulty mistakes. The next one, bitachon. This is very, just like the word bitachon, trust, is maybe more than any other word in the chart, the one that is most closely related to emunah, faith. Even though faith is way at the very top, and bitachon, trust or confidence, is way down here in Netzach. But there's definitely a very, very close relationship between the two, the simple meaning of the two words. So also, just like faith meant to establish long-term relationships, here as trust, give your employees, he says, a sense of security. If your employees are being afraid all the time of being fired, tomorrow if I don't do it right, the boss is going to fire me, then nothing will go right. Don't scare your employees. Just the opposite. Not only don't scare them because if you scare them, they're definitely going to do things wrong. Give them a sense of security. Even from the very first day that you employ them, give them some sense that you're employing them once more on a long-term basis and that you rely upon them and you're giving them the maximal responsibility themselves. So how does he say it? He says, give employees a sense of security, thus allowing them to work more effectively. The more security the employee feels, the more effectively he'll do his job. What is the verse for that? Ki hu hanoten lecha koach lasot chayil. This is a verse that we already quoted today, that to be effective in a job means that I feel my ability, that I'm able to do this job. What does a worker have to feel? He has to feel that I am really qualified to do it. I'm potentially doing a good job. I can do it. To feel that I can do the job right, he has to sense there has to be some source of flow of energy into him. So if we're talking about a Jew leading a good life with initiative and ambition, that source of energy is coming from Hashem. And that gives him his own self-confidence to go out and do things and accomplish. If we're in a corporate situation, then the head of the corporation or the manager above this worker himself has to be giving him an input of energy to do his job effectively. How does he give him input of energy to do his job effectively? By not scaring him. By not scaring him away, not making him frightened and not making him nervous, by giving him a sense of security, you yourself are giving him input of energy to make him feel that I am qualified to do the job, and thereby he really will do the job in the most effective manner. That's called Ki hu hanoten lecha koach lasot chayil. The next one reads, Hod Tamimut, eliminate work standards, quotas, and management by objectives. Management by objectives is the antithesis of the quality management. Management by objectives means quantity objectives. Quotas, what does quotas mean? How much you did, not how well you did it. So that has to go. And once more, this is the Satan as far as this system of management is concerned. It's the very, very most negative force, which is quota management. How much did you produce? Did you produce your quota? That has to go, to be eliminated. Where does that come from in the soul? It comes in the soul doing things simply and sincerely. However much you did, you did. How well did you do it? That's what's important. Don't become nervous that I have to meet a quantitative goal. I have to do it as well as I can, as much as I can. And that, once more, that has to be the inspiration that's coming from above. That we want you to do as well as you can, as much as you can, but without quotas. Without management by quantitative objectives, which are superficial objectives, as we said before. Now here at this point, again, we can't go into, we're trying to do it as quick as possible, can't go on in length, but this whole idea of quantity versus quality is a tremendously deep subject in Kabbalah and Chassidut. And the truth is that Kol HaKavod to Demming, and Demming was a very insightful individual, and we're now trying to convert him in our discussion right now. But the fact that he saw his arch enemy to be management by objectives and by quantity, there's still something to be said about this, because there's a famous principle in Kabbalah and in Chassidut, and the Rabbi used to say this very often, that sometimes kamut osa ichut. In certain situations, quantity produces quality. So that thought is missing here from our system. Once more, the arch enemy of this system is quantity-oriented management. Everything has to be quality. So the one point that is missing here, and this again is a very deep thing that we cannot explain when we say this principle, but there is definitely a time that quantity makes quality. So let's just leave it at that. Nonetheless, he says to eliminate quotas. What's the verse for that? The verse for that in Mishlei is Holech batom yelech betach. If a person walks simply, and once more, simply means that he does as much as he can, as well as he can. without pressuring him. No pressure is placed that he has to meet a quota. He does as much as well. That is called walking simply. Tmimut, that's hod. However much you did as well as you did it, I say to you, thank you very much. Hod means thanksgiving, to thank a person simply and purely for however much he was able to accomplish. If a person walks with simplicity and sincerity, he's walking the straight and secure way. Holech batom yelech bet. That's the verse for this principle. And the way that this principle relates to this power of the soul. The next one, second to the end, is Yesod. This is also a very related idea. Just like we eliminate quotas and management by quantitative objectives, in the same way, eliminate slogans and exhortations. Recognize the true origin of deficiencies in the essence of the system. Don't put a sign on the wall, don't make mistakes. Even though we had before, Gvura, that there has to be yirah, fear of mistakes, especially in the management, but that's first by taking responsibility. Don't demand that slogans of your employees that give the sense that he has to be perfect. Why? Because if he's not perfect, it's not his fault. It's your fault, as we said before. Once more, these are a little bit overlapping, but the new principle here that he's saying is avoid slogans. So once more here, at this point, we also have to say that what about Hikono Lebiat HaMashiach? What about slogans, putting up posters around the country, prepare ourselves for the coming of Mashiach and so forth? So obviously there must be some difference here. But again, we have to try to understand what the difference is. Nonetheless, there's also, it's true, what he is trying to say. Because he's talking about chitzeniustika, blitus is the word in Chassidut. There are certain slogans which are pure chitzenius. Pure chitzenius means purely superficial. And being superficial, they're also not exact. They're not true. They're false. They're deceptive. For instance, we said that this level of Yesod has to do with advertisement. Advertisement is also jingles and slogans. What are usually jingles and slogans? Deceptive. Not true. So when he says eliminate slogans and exhortations, he means deceptive, which is a very pegam habrit. The pegam, the blemish of this level of the soul, which is called the Yesod. How is that also said in Chassidut? Don't have false blitot. Blitot means sticking out. If a person does not stick out with blitot, he's called Hatznei Alechet im Hashem Elokech. He walks modestly with God. That's called the Tikkun Habrit in Kabbalah. Once more, no external signs. He's talking about slogans which are external exhortations. That's bad. That's blitus. That's chitzenius. That's pigam habrit in Kabbalah. What does he say? He says, recognize that the problem lies in the foundation of the system. Foundation is Yesod. That the problem is in the foundation. It's not on the surface. Slogans and exhortations relate to the surface. It's not in the surface, it's in the foundations. What's the verse for that? So one for the verse we quoted just now. Hatznei alechet im Hashem Elokecha. Eliminate, just don't say it. Rather than using a deceptive slogan, just don't say anything. Don't fall into the trap of chitzenius and blitot. Hatznei alechet im Elokecha. The last one, Malchut, Shiflut. This one, again, seems to be similar to what we previously taught to be Da'at. Da'at was to work, if we want to change the whole company, we want to transform the company, to re-engineer the company, we have to work together. Everybody has to be involved. Yachad Shiftei Yisrael. That was Da'at. Now here's something which is similar, but instead of being dot, the central point of dot, it is at the very lowest point, which is Malchut, kingdom, which says that you have to break down barriers between departments. That people have to know from one department what's going on, what's happening in another department, in order that the whole company comes into a sense that we're working as a team. So first of all, what's the difference? What is the simple difference between this one and the previous one? The previous one was talking about directing a total change of the system, re-engineering the company. This one is not talking about re-engineering the company. It's just talking about learning to work as a team. Learning to work together. How do you learn to work together? By making sure that there's a flow of information from department to department. How do you do that? By breaking barriers. That not every person is doing his own little thing. Which also has to do with the Rosh Katan that we heard before, his own little head with his own little task, and he doesn't care at all about what's happening on the other side of the wall. Why did we place that in Malchut? Because, once more, the inner property of Malchut is Shiflut. One of the teachings of Shiflut, which is lowliness, is the awareness that I can't do it by myself. I'm never going to be able to do it by myself. I can only do it together with everybody else. Because we can only accomplish our goal if we work as a team. So basically, in general, to break barriers between people. Before we said that there's a certain level, like the Anshe Chayil according to Rashi, that he is unswayable because he's rich enough not to be able to be bribed by anybody. And then we use the term that he's self-efficient, and he's independent, an independent individual, self-sufficient. On the other hand, lowliness is almost an opposite feeling. It's a feeling that I can never do something totally by myself. And that the only way to overcome one, if a person thinks that he's self-sufficient, then he puts himself into a box and he does his own thing, his own trip. And he doesn't care about what somebody else is doing, even though we're working under the same roof, the same company. But ego places you into a independent little box of doing your own little thing and not caring about what somebody else is doing. In order to overcome that problem, a person has to be shafel, he has to be lowly. The more lowly he is, the more that he lowers the walls, the personality walls between himself and somebody else, between my department and somebody else's department. And he recognizes, we said before, if he's really lowly, that I can't accomplish things by myself. And it's important for me to know about what you're doing, and you to me to know about what I'm doing. And we have to work together as a team. What is the phrase for this? This is a phrase which comes from Pirkei Avot together as quoted in Sefer HaTanya. So now we're concluding the whole seminar today with a statement from the classic work of Hasidut, which is Sefer HaTanya, in the Igeret HaKodesh, that he says like this. He says, Hevesh Faruach Bifnei Kol Adam. He first quotes Chazal, quotes the sages, says, be lowly of spirit in face of every man. It's being lowly towards every man. And then he continues, what does that produce? So first of all, he says, why is that the case? Why must one be lowly in the face of every man? Shekol echad metukan mechaviro. That every person is more rectified than his friend. Now this has two readings. One reading is that every person has a point of rectification, of goodness that I don't have. I have to be lowly before you because you have something that I don't have. That's reading number one. Reading number two, which is even a deeper reading, is explained by the Rabbi, is that Shekol echad metukan mechaviro, that I become rectified through you. Not only do I have to be lowly before you because you have something that I don't have, but even more than that, I can only reach my own rectification if you help me. That's why I have to be lowly in your face, in front of you. So once more, every department in the company has to be so lowly in the face of every other department that it recognizes that I not only do something which I don't do, and therefore it's necessary for us to be partners, but even what I do, I can't do it right if I don't know what you're doing. If I don't recognize that I need your help to do my thing right. Not only do I have to know what you're doing, just to be lowly for your sake, because you're doing a big thing that I'm not doing, but I can't accomplish my task without your help. And so once more, this is a very famous, important quote from Sefer Tanya, which helps explain why we put this principle in Malchut. That Malchut is lowliness, but lowliness which here results in the need for cooperation. For cooperation in everything, which is a flow of knowledge, and once more everybody helping, being aware and helping everybody else. So what we just now did is we went through these 13 principles and related to them to the 13 levels of the soul, as explained in Chassidut, and we hope that what came out of this was a lot of light from the darkness. So.
There is some time, if somebody has any question, that I will answer some questions.
If you have an employee that you feel is excessive and not necessary, that you have to maintain them?
Rabbi, if we can answer the question so everybody here.
To give him the right thing, but it doesn't mean that every rule has its exception to it. It doesn't mean that you have to keep everybody. As long as he's working for you, you should try to help him do his thing best by giving him security. If you finally come to the decision that he just is not right for the company, then that's something that happens.
Is there a way of relating these 13